Gospel according to Luke, we have a passage that is so important in the life of the church, in the life of the faith, that every morning in monastic communities and in Anglican and Episcopal churches, this is used as a recognition of what God has done and is doing. So I would invite you, in both the bulletin or in your hymnal on page 208, the Canticle of Zechariah, and canticle is another word for psalm. So whenever it has the red R, red R, it'll be these words: Hail to the Lord's anointed, great David's greater son. All right, do you think you got that? Okay, this is where everyone should be nodding their head. Okay. Blessed be the Lord, the God of Israel, who has come to set the chosen people free.
The Lord has raised up for us a mighty Savior from the house of David.
To the holy prophets, God promised of old to save us from our enemies, from the hands of all who hate us.
To show mercy to our forebears, and to remember the holy covenant.
This was the oath God swore to our father Abraham.
To set us free from the hands of our enemies, free to worship without fear, holy and righteous in the Lord's sight, all the days of our lives.
Hail to the Lord's anointed, great David's greater son. And you, child, shall be called the prophet of the Most High, for you will go before the Lord to prepare the way.
To give God's people knowledge of salvation by the forgiveness of their sins.
In the tender compassion of our God, the dawn from on high shall break upon us.
To shine on those who dwell in darkness and the shadow of death, and to guide our feet into the way of peace. Hail to the Lord's anointed, great David's greater son.
Blessed be the name of the Lord. Blessed be the God of Israel, who has come to set us free. The Benedictus Dominus Deus Israel. Blessed be the God of Israel. What a powerful statement that is, that we should use more often. I looked up this morning. The Merriam-Webster Dictionary has this to say about the word blessed. It defines it as something held in reverence, something honored in worship, or of enjoying happiness, something that brings pleasure, contentment, or good fortune. Or something used as an intensive. So when you hear these words, blessed be the Lord, what is on our hearts and on our lips should be what Zechariah was referring to. So I want y'all to relax a little bit. Y'all are looking way too serious this morning. This is Advent. This is not Lent. Yes, it's time of preparation. Don't get me wrong. But I want you to enjoy this season. I want you to have a blessed Christmas. Well, you can't have a blessed Christmas unless you have a blessed Advent. So it's kind of... I'll talk to you later. Zechariah, who was anticipating the arrival of his son. And as Lisa mentioned in the prayer, Zechariah at first didn't believe God's promise. Now, this is troubling, because if you think about it, he was a good Jewish man. He had been raised and taught and shared the history of his people, whose whole being was dependent on the focal point of Abraham's faithfulness. Abraham's trust in God's promise. And we see throughout Israel's history, when they relied on God's promise, life was good. When they did not believe in God's promise, not so good. And so Zechariah is presented with his son. And he doesn't say, it looks like a lizard. Those of you who were there this morning in class know what that's about. He doesn't say, great, tax break. He doesn't say, are you sure everything's there? All the things that we say about newborn babies. Instead, he offers praise to God. Blessed be the God of Israel. With those words, he summons from his ancestors the promise of God. Because he is no longer waiting for someday. It's here. It's now. And so he says, blessed be the God of Israel. That is a revolutionary statement then and now. Because, well, blessed. When you say God is blessed, you're saying that God is due our blessing. And that God is entitled to our praise and our worship. So often we make worship about us. What is our preference? What is our style? I'm as guilty of it as anybody else. But Zechariah points out that in the everyday moments of life, the birth of a child, God is blessed. That it's not a matter of a moment or a place or an action, but in everyday life, God is present. You see, that's the joy of Advent. So when you go to the store and you're dealing with, well, things that happened at stores at this time of year, think of the blessings that you're witnessing. Because God is present in the chaos. God is there in the lines and in the stuff. When a baby is born, do you think all the work is done? Okay, those of you who have had children know. Well, I've never had children. So, I hear people talk about, oh gosh, all this work. I mean, come on, the baby's born. The hard stuff is over, right? Well, Zechariah, presented with this new responsibility, is given the choice of saying, oh no, now I'm in trouble. Now comes the hard part. Instead he says, blessed be God for this opportunity that in the midst of my life I get to witness another promise of God fulfilled. Because the promise given from God had come down from Abraham and had come through the prophets and through Moses and through the kings and through the life of the community. If the promises had not been realized all along, the words, blessed be the God of Israel, would be hollow and meaningless, and we would not be here today. But because a man a long time ago acknowledged what we now believe to be the truth, that God came and blessed us with the awareness that God is with us. Now, the word, come on, folks. Y'all don't look like you've been blessed at all. Yes, this is serious stuff, and we should be reverent in the house of God. But if you can't be excited with God's presence with you, what are you going to do when you actually come face to face with God? Yeah, that's exactly what you're going to do. When Zechariah says in the first half of this psalm, blessed be the God of Israel, who came. The Savior has raised up for us a mighty Savior from the house of David. Through the prophets, God promised to save us from our enemies, to show mercy to our forebears, and to remember the Holy Covenant. Do you get what Zechariah is saying here? That all of this, the history of Israel, has come into this point where we are receptive to the promise and the promise giver. It's not the gift that we're given. I'm going to say something really radical here. Christmas is not the most important moment of the church year. I know. Some of you, I thought so, ooh. Christmas is not about the baby. It's not about the manger. It's about the promise of God fulfilled. Because in the promise, in the stable, Zechariah says, that is the promise that we've been waiting for. The promise of God fulfilled. That all of this waiting, it was Raleigh who said 2015 years of waiting. But God has been here all along, waiting for us to realize it. Zechariah spends several verses talking about the one who issues the promise, the faithfulness of God, reminding this infant son that he is part of that line of promise recipients. And he shifts now to speaking to this infant And I'm sure some of you remember what your parents told you as an infant. And you, child, shall be called a prophet of the Most High. No pressure. If you're in the Jewish tradition, prophets did not have an easy life. And for you as a parent to say to your child, I want you to be a prophet. You are a prophet. Not a prophet as somebody who predicts the future, but somebody who delivers a message from God. Someone who has, in the presence of God's Spirit, an openness and a willingness to share what God has placed within them. So, when he says, you will give God's people knowledge of salvation. Wow. Do you get how significant a statement that is? You're not going to say, oh, like the horoscopes do in the paper. I mean, my gosh, if everyone had a horoscope like that, where everyone's day was wonderful, and you'll have a full head of hair. I'm still waiting for that one. To give God's people knowledge of salvation, not liberation from Rome, not lower taxes, not something from them all, but the knowledge of salvation. The good news of God's fulfillment of promise. That's what the prophets were telling all along. And Zechariah is saying about the infant John, who we would one day call the Baptist. You're in that line of not promise makers, but promise reminders. But God does not come in the form of a child so that we will be afraid of what life has to offer. But in the tender compassion of our God, the dawn from on high shall break upon us, to shine on those who dwell in darkness and the shadow of death, and to guide our feet into the way of peace. He says of John, this is your destiny. The destiny of one who will say to Israel, it's a new day. The promise that you've been talking about and thinking about and sharing with your children, it's here. It's now. You don't have to wait anymore. All this waiting, which has been done sometimes out of responsibility or obligation, or sometimes just because out of habit. Whatever the condition of your waiting has been, it's now. It's now. Because God is faithful. Do you get how significant that is? In a land, in a time when there was a God for everything. The difference between waiting for the God and waiting for the God is significant. Zechariah is not saying to John, You're going to be a seller and a marketer and a program director of a religion.